Hey everyone, welcome to Encounters USA. If it's aliens, UFOs, Bigfoot, or dogmen you're looking for, you came to the right place. Now listen up as we listen to some of the latest encounters. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Encounters USA. I'm your host, author Matthew Hines. Today we have an amazing show. We're going to be talking about the Nimitz Encounters, and we have a lot of information that you might not have and that you might not know. So I think this is going to be a really important podcast for you and everybody else you know. Now, there's a couple announcements I would like to make. Yesterday, or last weekend rather, we were going to have a live podcast with Michael Hall, the paranormal lawyer. He was down at the Storm Area 51 event, and you know what? Michael got so involved, he actually lost his contact stuff, and he had put his information about my podcast, etc., in a place, and he had left it back here in Washington State. So unfortunately, we spent all weekend hoping to get in touch with Michael down at the Storm Area 51 event. We could never do so, but he did leave us a message finally, and it was kind of sad that we couldn't get a hold of him, but really it wasn't, because what happened at the Storm Area 51 event, not a whole lot. Now, I talked to Michael back in August, and if you want to see that encounter, then you can go ahead and check our past videos. We actually interviewed Michael at ESETI Ranch about not storming Area 51. And, well, maybe a lot of people took his and our advice. All right. A couple announcements also. Next month is October. And October at Encounters USA is Dogman month. I say Dogman, but this month we are going to actually be putting it to you, the people, the listeners, the voters. What would you rather have, Dogman or Wolfen? Now remember, Dogman is not a dog, nor is Dogman a man. Wolfen is a more fit and apt description and name. Also, it pays fitting tribute to the 80s movie, and don't forget, it also has something to do with paranormal podcast host on Project Camelot, Carrie Cassidy. If you want to know what, go check back on a few of my past encounters. All right. Anything else that we need to talk about? Yes, we do need to talk about what was the end result. And like in a week or so, actually not in a week or so, because of course next month is Dogman month, but we will be bringing Michael Hall out to talk about the future of this Storm Area 51 movement, because it looks like they have some kind of an alien stock thing coming out of it, which could be kind of fun, I guess, kind of like a what is that thing? The Burning Man, maybe for aliens or something, Burning Alien or something like that. I'm sure it would scare off the aliens at Area 51 just to see the kinds of people that would attend that. But maybe not a bad idea. All right, so the next thing that we want to talk about before we get into the Nimitz Encounters is, seriously, we need to talk about what is going on with the Navy. Now, the Navy is coming out. They came out a couple years ago, and they showed people this gun camera footage, right? And then last week they came out and they said, oh, these videos are real. Well, what exactly is that supposed to mean? Now, of course, the fake media twisted it all around and said that somehow these UFOs have to do with aliens or extraterrestrials, and then the Area 51 thing, et cetera, et cetera. Well, in no case does the Navy say that, and it's really a question of understanding English, the English language, to really understand what the Navy is saying. And what they're actually saying, we're not going to talk about right now because we need to talk about the Nimitz Encounters. And when we finish with the Nimitz Encounters, we're going to talk about this announcement by the Navy and what it really means. And if you go all the way through this podcast and you can't answer that question by the time we actually give you the answer, well, then you need to listen to the podcast again and make sure you're subscribed. All right. The first thing we need to talk about now is the Nimitz encounter. Now, I don't want to be too rudimentary, and I don't want to be too advanced. I've just got to go right down the middle of the road. If you have no knowledge about this, you might want to Google it or something and watch the video later, because there is a lot going on here, and a lot of it is very technical. And I don't want to get really technical and bore the you-know-what out of people. So the first thing that we need to talk about is what happened. What happened with the Nimitz encounter? Now, if you don't know, the Nimitz is an aircraft carrier, and an aircraft carrier is part of a bigger collection of ships that cruise around the world's oceans and exercise U.S. power. It's a really impressive sight to see, and it's a lot of military hardware, and it's all very expensive, and there's a lot of people, fine young men and women, involved in these operations. That's the first thing that you need to know. The Nimitz is out off of the coast of California, down by Baja, about 100 miles off the coast, and they are getting ready to start practicing maneuvers. Now, let's set the scene for this. The year is 2004. The month is November. The prior year, in 2003, we had invaded Iraq. We have been in operations, and they have really heated up. And these guys, these servicemen and women, have seen a lot of action in the Gulf, comparatively. So for Navy people. Now, I was in the Army, so, we have our own prejudice, but I won't get into that now. So these guys have seen action. They've been, out there. They've been doing the thing, and now they've got a training exercise to attend. So better than being in the Gulf, and they are out attending this training exercise. Now, there are 4 people that came forward, possibly 5, that came forward about this event, and that came forward as whistleblowers, et cetera, whatever you call it. And these are the people that we're going to be talking about. One of these people was on the Nimitz itself, on the big aircraft carrier. The other people were on, 2 people were on the Princeton, and I'm not sure where Jason Turner was, but Gary Voorhees and Kevin Day were on the Princeton. And on I'm not sure which day of the exercise it was, but on this date, November 10th, 2004, they began noticing, according to Kevin Day, they picked up these strange aircraft on their radar. All right. So Day was, according to, this is all on according to a 30-minute YouTube video, and I'll post a link on it. You can see for yourself. I kind of went through here and picked out what was relevant information, and I was left with quite a few questions. So we'll be talking about those questions after I give you the basics of this encounter. So this is Day. He's got these things on his radar. They're down off the coast of Baja, and there's, he says, 5 to 10 of them each time he sees them. And he sees them the first day. And over the course of the first day that he sees them, he sees 5 to 10 of these, and he calls them tracks. And they are at 28,000 feet, and they're moving south. Now, this story is not completely clear, and I apologize, but this is why I have so many questions about it, and this is why I'm inviting any of these guys that were involved in this onto my podcast to clear this up for myself and for you guys. So the next thing that happens is he's got these things on his radar, and he is on one of the most sophisticated, expensive fleets on the ocean, and he's got 5 to 10 tracks, and they have no transponder, which means that the device that every aircraft in the air must have during the height of the War on Terror, he's got 5 to 10 crafts with no identifying transponders. These transponders send out signals. They give you the flight number, etc., and information, origin, destination of craft. There was none of this for 5 to 10 crafts. And they were not flying in what he called the commercial corridor. Now, after all of this Day person, let me get Kevin Day, who is basically, he's controlling the traffic. He's the traffic controller. He does not find any reason. He doesn't think that these are a threat. Okay. Now, I don't know if you understand how completely insane that is, but to have 5 to 10 aircraft with no transponders flying south in the vicinity of this fleet is really, I don't know, it's pretty bizarre that they would not have had a little bit more concern over that. But apparently they didn't. We'll be talking about that a little bit later. All right. So over the course of 3 to 4 days, now remember this first encounter started on November 10th. That's when they first saw these things. And this is why these dates are so important, and they're not clear. So the first sighting was on the 10th, according to this. And then over 3 to 4 days, they kept getting every day. They were getting these sightings, right? And they were, according to the thing, they were 5 to 10 tracks each time. Now, I just want to throw in there, right? Well, I'm not going to throw in there yet. Just remember that. 5 to 10 craft each time that he saw these each day. All right. So we get to November 14th of 2004. And we have this is an exercise day, November 14th. So they've been seeing these things for 4 days, and now they're launching aircraft and helicopters. And these aircraft are being vectored in the direction of these objects, and these objects are only 40 miles south of Nimitz. That means with a weapon, they could attack the Nimitz within seconds. 40 miles south, and they decide they've got this flight of F-15s out. On one of the F-15s, they have a brand new pilot. She's on her first carrier tour, and as her weapons communications officer, she has a senior officer who's basically, guiding her, telling her what to do. So, but she's flying, and then there's a commander of another plane, and he is in charge basically of the flight. Now, with these two F-15 Eagles, and these are called Eagle Flight or something, then there's also another craft, and this is a propeller plane, and it's called a wall banger. It's called a radar plane, and it is basically it has a sophisticated radar. And so it can direct traffic between the Princeton with Day and this plane. They're directing traffic between the two. And the captain of the Princeton has allowed the vectoring of these two planes toward the object. All right, so here we go. Planes are moving toward the object. Now, as the planes start to vector toward the objects, a couple of weird things happen. The first thing that happens is that the plane, the the craft, whatever it is, it drops from 28,000 feet to 50 feet, the surface of the ocean, as high as that radar can track it. So basically, it can't see it, right? And as it does it, a lieutenant from the Princeton comes on board and asks what weapons these aircraft have on board, right? A lieutenant comes on and asks, what weapons do they have on board? Why would she ask that? Now, the reply was negative, training mission. They don't have any weapons on board. And you might say, well, this is just some green lieutenant trying to put their 2 cents in. Or was it something else? I don't know. We'll ask the questions later, but that's not what I'm going to ask. But that's something that you might want to ask. Why did they even ask about the weapons? So as she asked about the weapons on board, these F-15s they're going down, they're checking out the target, and they see a long, what they call a 737-sized craft underneath the surface of the water. And then shortly thereafter, this Tic Tac, the Tic Tac comes out of the water, and it starts to dart around very erratically. And now the guys in the pilot and the gal in the pilot, they're all watching this, and they are moving down as they're watching. They're circling down, bringing their craft closer. And at almost the same point as the communication as do you have weapons on board, this thing reacts, and it begins going up. It begins coming up towards these descending aircraft. And as these aircraft are circling around, this thing also begins circling around off of their wing, and basically just mirroring their object. So things are really starting to get heated up. Now, at the back on the Princeton, as they might say, people are listening to everything that's going on, and people are wondering. And then suddenly the call comes out, and it says, "I'm being in," something about the bogey. You'll have to watch the video to get the complete sentence. But he says, "The bogey, I'm engaged," right? So this thing, about the time it finds out it has no weapons, it comes up and it starts to engage these descending F-15s. Now, according to the witnesses, whatever, the data that came back, this craft, this Tic Tac, is very shiny. It looks almost plastic, and it's about 47 feet long. It's about the same size as their craft. And it engages them for a brief second, and then it just takes off, right? Disappears. And then they get a call, and it says that this thing, this object, which now appears to be on somebody's radar, is back at the original cap station. Remember, when they first started out, they had been rendezvousing at a certain location with all the other craft before they had been vectored. From that location, that was where the craft was waiting for them. Now, this was all very bizarre, and it got even more bizarre because, remember, there's another aircraft, their other radar plane, and that is flying along in support and giving them all their radar vectors, etc. And suddenly, this Tic Tac-like craft appears outside of their window off of one of their engines. And it appears there for a few seconds, and then it disappears, right? So these are the encounters, and this is what happened. All right, so we can get into the conjecture later, but this is what happened. They were vectored out to check out this thing. When they got to the point where it was supposed to be, there was a large bubbling something aircraft in the water, and then this Tic Tac came out. It came up as they were announced that they had no weapons. It began to engage them, and then it disappeared, and then it reappeared in at their original cap location, and then it also reappeared over or next to the wing of one of the airplanes. Now, The events that happened, these things happen over 3 to 4 days. I'm sure there are a lot of things that didn't happen. There are just some brief notes that I have taken. But the events that happened after that were all pretty much the same. These people came back to where, their ships. And on the Princeton, a helicopter landed. And according to Voorhees, 2 Air Force officers came in with his captain, and they took out, I want to make sure I'm saying this right, 2 Air Force officers and his captain came in and took cleared out all of the, in Voorhees, in his case, it was 2 civilians. In another case of these people that were taking out the computer logs of the Wallbanger flight, 2 civilians or 2 Air Force officers came and took those. So in each case, as soon as these encounters happened, you had people coming that nobody knew, but somehow knew that these encounters were happening. Now, there's questions about the timing, and there's questions about who these people are, and the et cetera, et cetera. And there's also a number of questions about these guys' statements and about how the Navy reacted. So we need to go back over what happened, and we need to talk about, in a lot of these cases, some of the testimony we need to look at. And we need to look at the reaction of what the Navy did and what it didn't, and why I think is going to become clear a little bit further on. So, okay, we all understand what happened now. So these guys are flying out, a young lieutenant and an older officer, right? And they're flying out, and they are, for some reason, tasked to go out with another plane and check out this flight. Now, this flight, according to this story, this is the 4th day. It's the 14th. And these guys started seeing these things on the 10th. And this is the first time anybody has been concerned enough to go and check these things out. So that should be noted, because we're going to talk about that a little bit later. Now, these guys are vectored to go out and check them out. Who are they vectored by? According to the story, Day says that he and his commander conferred to go and send this flight out to check these out. So these 2 planes and the radar plane are on their way out. And this thing, as it comes out, as they're on their way, obviously in the direction of that plane, that's when it drops from 28,000 to 50 feet. And everybody sees it. Everybody's watching on the radars or listening to the conversation. I don't know if anybody had it. I don't think anybody had it on the radar. I think that, or only the people in Princeton CIC had it on the radar. So that was why they were engaging. But the airplanes themselves did not have it on the radar. And according to the story, neither did the Wallbanger, the accompanying aircraft. So they're listening to this conversation. Now, as soon as this aircraft drops from 28,000 to 50 feet in less than 1 second, wouldn't it be standard procedure to scramble craft, because nobody knows what this is, right? Or maybe it crashed. Maybe it, committed suicide or something. But they didn't know craft was scrambled. So then they ask, do you have weapons on the plane? And immediately, I don't want to say immediately, but when they give a negative response, it seems that and remember, they're circling down and they're looking at this craft. And now suddenly this craft hears that they don't have weapons, and bam, they're off. And so it goes up and it tries it starts to engage, right? And it engages and kind of messes with these people. And at this point, why did the Nimitz not scramble more planes? Because obviously this guy says himself, I have a bogey, I'm engaged. Why were not more planes scrambled if for no other reason than to protect the fleet, right? Remember what they had said. Everything that they have is for training. There's no weapons, there's no missiles on it. So why wasn't something scrambled to protect these craft, all right? So that's another thing that we really need to think about. Now, it's just kind of a lackadaisical attitude, because obviously they knew these things were there. All right, so for 4 days, these people, according to their testimony, were able to walk out on deck of the Princeton with binoculars and look at these aircraft, right? At these so-called Tic Tacs. And at no time it was anything engaged, whatever, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So if all of that doesn't sound a little bit bizarre to you, then you need to look at the other incidents of encounters. Oh, actually, we need to finish out, because when every aircraft landed, every person was involved had to sign a non-disclosure agreement. Now, I don't know what the specifics are for the non-disclosure, but normally they're from at least 10 to 20 years. And maybe these guys signed 10-year non-disclosure agreements. I don't know, but that's a really serious question that I would like to ask. But these guys were all given non-disclosure agreements and told not to talk about what they saw. All right, so what we come out with immediately, right, and this is what the media has come out with, is that this is a UFO encounter, right? And these, the Nimitz encountered UFOs. Now, the Roosevelt, ever since the 1940s, 1950s, has had a number of UFO encounters, a number of them. And at no time were the pilots, whatever, immediately that were in contact, made to sign non-disclosure agreements, right? And at no time did these aircraft exhibit like staying there for long periods of time, like they did over consecutive days, like they did here. In those other encounters, they were very sporadic. But in this case, these were all regular formations, almost, I guess I'll say. But these are very odd circumstances when you compare previous encounters with like the Roosevelt, previous encounters with UFOs and the Nimitz, and now with this one. And now we're going to talk about the reasons why in just a little bit. But we want to make sure that we really understand what's going on here. That basically the Nimitz commanders showed no concern almost at all for these craft. Almost no concern at all. All right. So now, what could they be? Could they be extraterrestrial? Well, let's talk about that for 1 second, because we know there have been aircraft that have had encounters with what we think are extraterrestrial craft or technology that we certainly don't understand. Let's take this pilot in Iran, outside of Tehran, in 1976, that encountered a UFO that basically shut down his plane and shut down his weapon systems. In fact, what you find in most cases where pilots are in the vicinity of UFOs, especially military pilots, those pilots almost all report some malfunctioning of their craft. Now, did this happen in the case of the encounters? No, it didn't. Why didn't it? Well, we have to start looking at other sources besides extraterrestrial for where these craft are from. Now, you can say what you want and think what you want. I am just suggesting possibilities. If you want to think these are alien craft, then please do so. I would rather compare with what we know with what has happened here and see if we can't come up with the best logical conclusion. Now, according to a video, and I'm going to post the links in the description, there's a guy named Brent Tingley at thedrive.com, and they have discovered that in the year 2016, on April 28th, there was a patent applied for, and this is a patent for, and I'm quoting, a hybrid craft that creates a quantum vacuum and repels water and air. All right, so I'm not going to get too much into what a quantum vacuum might be, but I'm going to say this. If you read my book, Deceptions of the Ages, you are going to see it's called Mormons, Freemasons, and Extraterrestrials. And in the extraterrestrial chapters, there is a part that explains the technology of extraterrestrial craft. And this is based on encounters. This is based on people that have encountered them. And one of these people is Bob Lazar. And Bob says that using a certain element 115, they are able to create a hyperdense mass that is able to manipulate time and space. Well, what does that mean? It means that they're able to create a mini sun, and the sun, as Einstein showed, is big enough that it can bend the light traveling around it, therefore affecting time. So, if you can, according to Einstein, manipulate gravity, you can manipulate time. So what is happening with this thing is that it is able to create a hyperdense quantum field around it, and so it's not affected by anything except the field it is in. And that's as far technical as I want to get with you. In my book, I talk about how they use spinning mercury, and that's part of the triangle engine that you see these TR-3Bs. That's how those engines work. But these are created on a different system. Now, according to this patent, the thing, I'll call it a thing for now, is called the hybrid aerospace underwater craft. The hybrid aerospace underwater craft. And according to the patent, it is able to engineer the fabric of reality at the most fundamental level. All right. So another thing that we have to look at as well is that one of the things that is necessary, and I'm not going to get into all the physics in this because I don't really understand it, and I'm not going to bore you with it, but they needed to have superconductivity, which you can't have at room temperature. It takes a lot of energy and it takes a lot of heat, unless they found something, right? And if they did find something, and they did apply for a patent for something that has super conductivity at room temperature, and according to the patent, has military or considerable military and commercial value. All right, I know that's a lot to sink in, right? So let's just go back over to what we've discussed so far. So we've discussed the fact that these guys claimed that there was an engagement with a UFO involving Nimitz aircraft, and that the encounter involved a Tic Tac shaped object, and this object was able to perform properties that they had never seen before. And at one point during the conversation, the pilot says it just jumped 1,000 meters. It just jumped 1,000 meters. So basically it jumped through time and space 1,000 meters. All right. So it sounds a lot like this patent that was applied for, and it gets even more sounding like this patent they applied for when one of the shapes that this thing takes, most of them are triangles, but in this case, it is the shape of a Tic Tac. So there it is. In 2016, they applied for the patent for this thing. Now, there's a few questions that you may want to ask. And number one, why does the Navy need a patent for one of their own craft? But there it is. Now, these craft have also been designed, according to this story, with a Faraday cage, which means that they can put a human in it. And so if these things are real, then they are able to travel in time and space, et cetera, et cetera. All right, so now let's go full circle and let's go all the way back to the beginning of the podcast, not quite to the dogman part, but to the part where we're talking about how these craft are being disclosed by the Navy, right? And the Navy is coming out and saying that these are unidentified aerial phenomenon. And a few years ago, they had this crazy gun camera footage, and you had people that were supposedly pilots that were saying things like, dude, bro, my gosh, wahoo-hoo, and other things like this. And these are supposedly Navy pilots speaking like this over an Air Force channel. I don't think so. What this all looks like to me is it looks like the Navy and the Air Force are actually looking for these things. Not because they're not theirs, but because somebody else might have them. And by using the language, dude, bro, my gosh, I mean, those guys would be grounded if they were to ever talk like that. But to use that kind of language, it means what they're trying to do is they're trying to make it cool to have an encounter. Dude, whoa, wahoo, my gosh, it's cool to have an encounter now. So what they're looking for, I believe, is they're looking for people to report these things, not only because they want people to report our craft, but they also want people to report what they see that possibly could be from other countries. So that's the important point, I think, of all of this Navy disclosure, et cetera, is that they are, I think, trying to do two things. They're, number one, trying to get people prepared because this is the next level of technology. The second one is they want to find out if those things are readily visible, and they want to find out if anybody else is operating in our airspace that we can't see. So this is what is really, I think, behind all of these encounters. And as the last piece of evidence that I'm going to throw into this, when we go back to the Nimitz encounters, right? Now, just think of it. If you want to test a weapon system that is so out there, so, Buck Rogers, Star Wars, whatever, you're going to have to do it in a place where nobody is going to be able to see it. Obviously, this Area 51 thing is not working out so well. So they take it out to the ocean. Besides, what does the patent say? The patent says that it is it's a hybrid craft. It repels water and it propels air, and it's able to engineer the fabric of reality at the most fundamental level. So if you want to test something like that, there's two things that you don't want. You don't want people watching it, and you don't want people or this craft falling into enemy hands or anybody's hands in case something goes wrong. So where's the best place to do it? Right outside of your own Navy. That way, nobody is going to mess with it. So these things were conducted, these maneuvers were conducted in a place that has a long history of USO encounters, et cetera, et cetera. So maybe that's for a reason. Maybe those USOs are ours. Maybe they're not, but maybe they were using them as cover. But in my opinion, these craft do not exhibit the technology that we see in what we would call alien craft. I mean by size. I mean by the fact that they couldn't interact with the airplanes that they were dealing with, other than freaking out the crews. So those are my thoughts about it. And if you have any comments, I would sure like to hear them. And I would sure like to hear if you have any information about it. If you are one of the guys that were involved on the Nimitz, I would sure like to interview you on this podcast within the next week or so. But anybody that from the Nimitz that would like to come on here and talk, I'd sure like to ask you guys a few questions. So that is the Nimitz story, and that is disclosure, and that is our Encounters USA alien take on things for the month of September in the post-storm Area 51 world. Now, what do you think is really going to happen out of the Area 51 thing? Do you think anything's going to happen? You think anybody would show up for alien stock? If you think so, if you're going to participate in it, if you think it's cool, then go ahead and leave a comment. And if you haven't seen it yet, check out my video on at the East City Ranch with Michael Hall. And also, I really encourage you guys to get in touch with this UFO question. You have to read my book, Deceptions of the Ages, because until you understand who's really covering up the UFO question and the extraterrestrial question and what it really is, then you're really not going to understand anything, because you can't, as they say, see the forest for the trees. Now, in closing, just to keep this kind of open a little bit, I want to throw in one last idea and thought here, because we talk about Bigfoot and we talk about the Dogman and aliens and UFOs. And one thing that all of this stuff kind of ties into, whether you can comprehend this or not, at the same time that the Navy was studying UFOs, they had a $22 million program. Part of that money was going to Bob Bigelow's Skinwalker Ranch. Bob Bigelow had two different programs for studying the phenomena at Skinwalker Ranch. One of them had to do with NIDS, with the science aspect of it, but the other aspect of it had to do with Department of Defense stuff. So did they learn something at the Skinwalker Ranch? Did they learn how these things work? Did they learn the answers to, what do they call it? They call it a quantum vacuum. And they call it, they're able to engineer the fabric of reality at the most fundamental level. Is that what they learned at the Skinwalker Ranch? Well, that money went for something. And the same money that went to study UFOs went to the Skinwalker Ranch. So if you think this stuff is not related, you better look into it some more. All right, then. So I think that's the Nimitz encounter. I think that's the information that is relevant. And if you guys want to look into another bizarre encounter, check out the Maury Island encounter that I did last summer. It's just another bizarre relationship between the UFO question and the JFK assassination. And why were the same people involved in that? So it's all pretty weird stuff. But as far as this Nimitz encounter and as far as these UFO disclosures by the Navy, I think we really need to take them with a grain of salt, because there's a very good chance it's just a psyop. And what they're really saying is, Iran and China, watch out. we got this kind of stuff now. So you better watch your back. Thanks for listening to tonight's show. Please remember, if you've had an encounter, we want to hear about it. Go ahead and email us at encountersusa1@gmail.com or contact us at encountersusa.com, our website, and go to the contact form. All right, everybody. Until next time, be careful out there. And if you're out in the woods, watch your back.